Good afternoon or good evening, everybody. I'm Patrick Milliken from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and I'm kind of the default true crime aficionado or fan here at the bookstore. And it's a real pleasure to have this event today. And let me introduce our guests. We have Suruthi Bala and Hannah Maguire. We're going to be talking about their brand new book, Redhanded, an exploration of criminals, cannibals, cults, and what makes a killer tick. Just a really interesting and insightful new look at this subject. Very, very fresh. And let's see, Hannah Maguire and Suruthi Bala are co-hosts of the smash hit true crime podcast, Redhanded, which offers a weekly dose of murder, wit, and what the fucks, delivered with facts, anecdotal tangents, serious scrutiny, and real British flavor. And maybe even some Cockney rhyming slang if we're lucky.
Only if you're lucky, Patrick. Don't crack that up.
Redhanded prides itself on looking past sensational headlines and getting to the truth of every murder, cult, and serial killer. And also joining us today is Tori Telfer. She is the author of Lady Killers, Deadly Women Throughout History, and the host of the podcasts Criminal Broads, Why Women Kill, Truth, Lies, and Labels from the CBS All Access, and Red Flags from Investigation Discovery. And her latest book is Confident Women, Swindlers, Grifters, and Shapeshifters. What a great title. Welcome to our little show, guys. It's really great to have you all here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. And so I figured what I would do is, for those of you watching on Facebook, which of course is everybody, if you have questions for Hannah, Suruthi, or Tori, just go ahead and put them in the comments field as they occur to you. Don't be shy. And I will be happy to ask any questions you might have. Tori is going to be doing the heavy lifting here with the interview, but I think I'm going to lurk because I may have some questions to ask of my own. So for the moment, I'm going to hand it over to you, Tori.
Awesome. Thank you, Patrick. And hi, ladies of Redhanded. It's an honor to be talking to you.
You too. We're so excited. Thank you. Firstly, how do you do that many podcasts, Tori? That, as Patrick was reading that list, I was stressing me out. I'm sweating to think about it.
My bio is misleading. They're not all currently. It makes me sound like I'm juggling more than I am. But for a while, I was doing two, and it was very, very stressful. 2 weekly podcasts. One is almost too much, as you probably understand.
Yes, agreed.
So let's talk about your book, which is what we're here to celebrate.
It is.
The thing that surprised me most about your book.
By the way, before we get too far, I just wanted I forgot to mention that we have signed book plates. And it looks like Tori and I both still have the advanced reading copy. They have the nice hardcover, which we're expecting any moment. So I'm going to put buy links. I'll put buy links for Redhanded and also for Tori's book, Confident Women, in the comments field. Anyway, commercial plug concluded.
So there are a lot of true crime books out there, as you know, as well as I. I was very impressed by how science heavy your book was, because that's not necessarily the norm. Some are very history heavy, some are just nonsense fluff. But you two took this in a very scientific direction. I mean, you're citing so many studies, and you even have it categorized into kind of scientific categories. You talk about psychology, you talk about genetics, you talk about mommy issues. I'm just curious, what did you always know you wanted the book to be, so to have this science backbone, or was that something that happened as you were writing it?
I think with the science backup, something that happens to us reasonably often is that, what do you know about that? Because, we're not criminologists, we're not psychologists, we're not ex-Scotland Yard, whatever. So like when we were writing the book, we thought it felt like a very obvious option to be like, oh, well, it's not just us that's saying it, and then building the argument from there, and having academic backgrounds as well. Like it just sort of made sense to make an argument in that way.
Yeah, it's purely just because we are fascinated by the research into these spaces, and we discovered so many things. I think that was the key thing, that during the course of writing this book, it felt like such a much needed crash course in true crime for ourselves. One of the impetus of writing this book was because we were in lockdown, and we walked away from it just being like, I am a better podcaster, I'm a better true crime expert.
Yes, totally.
Because we wrote this book, because there were things that we discovered writing this book that you just wouldn't have the time to sit and read those scientific journals had we not been writing the book. And it's exactly as Hannah said, why we are never on the podcast, in the book, trying to present ourselves as experts. We are not investigative journalists, we are not scientists, we're not anything. We are storytellers, and what we do is just collect all the information that's out there and deliver it in as nuanced a way as possible. And I hope that's what came across in the book as well.
Yeah. Oh, it absolutely came across. And that's so cool that you felt like you ended up better podcasters after doing the book. What a nice side effect. So when it came to unpacking these scientific studies, I know you both have an academic background, so that must have helped. What about separating the legit ones from the iffy ones? Because like I used to have a Google alert for serial killer studies and it was too much, but
oh my God. We had that accidentally set up while writing this book. Now I'm just like unsubscribing to every single thing that lands in our inbox.
Yeah.
But no, it's definitely a key problem in this space. And that's actually another reason why we wanted to go down the scientific route, because in parts we wanted to show you could pick any narrative you want to, and you can find a scientific study that backs it up. But as soon as you scratch beneath the surface with some of those, you're going to see that they're massively flawed in many ways. And I think that within the genetics chapter, which is chapter 1, is particularly where that piece stands out. I think previously on the show, we've talked about things like the warrior gene, which probably hit like peak spotlight fame on Dr. Phil and all those kind of shows, like about 10 years ago maybe, and everyone was like, oh, he's got the warrior gene, that's why. And we thought that maybe that had died away, and we were like, what does it actually mean? Is it real? And then we came across that case that NPR had covered with Bradley Waldrop, who is the case that we cover in the genetics chapter, where this man had murdered this woman and then found guilty of manslaughter because his defense were able to say he's got the warrior gene, he can't control himself. And then the sound clip that I heard from NPR journalists who went and spoke to these jurors, and they said, well, bad gene's a bad gene. And my jaw hit the floor, because I was like, oh my God, what dystopian nightmare is this? And I think we really didn't want anything. We just wanted to write the book, but it ended up being quite a myth-busting piece, because we were like, look at the warrior gene, look at how many official articles say that it's real, all the scientific research been done into it, and then look how easily disprovable it is with just a few basic scientific facts and studies that we could find. So that's the thing about us, is that because we don't cite ourselves as experts, we have no agenda. We're not trying to say, this is the theory, this is the research that we've spent years doing, it better be right. We've got no skin in the game. We just want to get to the truth. And I think that's what actually makes it better, that we have no background in anything criminology wise.
Yeah, no, I think that is a blessing. I really do. You mentioned debunking, which leads perfectly into my next question, because as I was reading it, I was like, oh, there are these moments when true crime fans are going to be like, what? Like, I thought it was this, but you guys show it this. So what were some of the biggest true crime cliches that you uncovered, disproved, etc., as you were writing this?
I think the biggest one is that all serial killers are white men.
Mm-hmm. Did you think that before you started researching? Just curious.
Not before we started researching the book, before we started doing the show, I would say probably, yeah.
And I don't think I realized how diverse it was. I think there was this line in this study that I came across that we were talking about in the bigotry chapter, which is serial killers are as diverse as the nations from which they come from. And I think you are just spoon-fed that narrative, aren't you? That they're white men, and the reasons behind that was something we were interested in exploring.
Yeah, and I think like the major reason that we think serial killers are white men is generally serial killers kill people within their own ethnic group, and they're more likely to kill women if it's a male killer. And white women, unfortunately, are much more likely to be missed when they go missing, statistically speaking. So that's why someone like Samuel Little, who's killed hundreds and hundreds of women, has gone completely unnoticed, because he was killing women of color and also sex workers who are also under the radar. And that's a sad truth. It's not to do with like who they are as people, it's the demographic in which they lie.
Absolutely. And actually that was a really interesting discovery. And I love that we explored deeper than that as well, where it was like, we looked at somebody like Gary Heidnik or Jeffrey Dahmer, who are household names, especially Dahmer, and that they predominantly, you know, majority of his victims were men of color, Black and Latin men. So we were like, but he is a household name. So it's not even just about the victims. And what we discovered there was this interesting theory that maybe it's because Hollywood has glamorized serial killers to the point that we think of them as omnipotent and genius level. All of them are so cunning and they're like, you know, chess grandmasters. They're 5 steps ahead of everybody. And we've really fetishized that. There was such an interesting article that we cite in the book about maybe it's because in society, we're only comfortable giving those kind of charismatic, genius level, or 5 steps ahead of the police kind of traits to white men. And maybe that's the reason as well that we do this. I think another thing that I found quite surprising was just this discovery that psychopathy being widely considered in scientific circles to be a congenital condition. I did not realize that that was the case. We always said on the show, you know, it's multifaceted, you know, people aren't necessarily born that way, but to see that psychopathy actually is widely regarded to be congenital, i.e. you're born with it, was shocking.
And also that it's not actually a medical diagnosis, like it doesn't exist.
No.
Like it exists under the umbrella around social personality disorder, which like as people who have occupied the space, like we should have known that, but it isn't anywhere. And like you'll see it in like, what was the one you watched the other day? It was like, oh, he's a psychopath. I'm like, on what grounds? You don't even know who he is. Like, what the fuck? Like, there's no like, it's thrown around so much, and not nobody. Obviously, there are people that do know what it means, but the majority, especially in the true crime space, people are very
again, it's like glamorization and the fetishization of
throw the psychopath word, this cold, unfeeling, and psychopaths do have feelings. It's another thing we learned.
Yeah, that whole section was surprising to me. I find the whole psychopath, sociopath thing so confusing. Everyone said something different. I recently, someone tried to get me like on record giving a soundbite defining psychopath versus sociopath, and I refused. I was like, I will not go on record.
No,
don't do it. Don't do it.
And I didn't even
have
worth it. It was like, no, I'm not. I will not perjure myself.
You did the right thing, Tori, honestly.
I agree.
Thank you. He was taken aback, but I'm glad to have your support.
Yeah, stand your ground.
But I want to go back to the serial killers of color, because that is something that was on my mind several years ago when I wrote a book about female serial killers, and I could not. It's a mostly white book because I found it so difficult to find female serial killers of color within the parameters I had set for myself. So I didn't do anyone past 1950. So there are a few more better known ones after that. But it's like, I know it's probably not true that all female serial killers are white. That, just like the male serial killers, is probably some weird Hollywood meets racism meets who the historical record writes about and who they don't thing. That being said, it's like, where are the female serial killers of color? Where are they? I can think of like less than 5.
You've got me beat.
I mean,
not names at all.
We haven't found them either, but I think it's a reporting thing, and it's a victimology thing also. I find it incredibly difficult to believe that there is some magical power that women of color have that makes them not murderers. But there's I think women are less likely. We recently found out that in the UK, at least, women who commit violent crimes will get longer prison sentences than men who commit violent crimes. Any other crime, it's the other way around. But we are so taken aback when women commit violent crimes that we feel like falling from womanhood is a crime in itself. So that deserves an extra sentence, right? So people are already not looking for women in a murderous space, and maybe women of color is an extra layer on top of that, which is an odd place to be in, but I think it's one that we occupy.
I think it's also possibly the situation with female killers is that their motivations are often different and often possibly less glamorous than with male killers. So male killers are, we know, predominant serial killers. I think we say in the book it's something like 86% of them are motivated by sex. And I think that meshes together with our fascination with sex and violence together in one combo. And I think there are definitely a ton of female serial killers we don't know about, but I think they're motivated by other things like possibly money and possibly revenge or things like that. And that's just not as sexy. I just think we're not as interested in that motivation. And that's why when you have women who kill with sex as a motivator, like somebody like a Rose West, we lose our minds over it because she's such an anomaly and it's like the perfect storm.
Or maybe women are just better at it.
Yeah, there's also that. Yeah.
That's something I've always thought. I read a study, on average, they go 10 years longer without being caught.
Yes.
You got it.
Doing it for themselves.
They're only brought down when they pair up with a man.
Yeah.
That's when you get caught. Yeah.
It's clear. Just stay
This is starting to scare me a little bit here.
Good.
Okay, so let's talk culture. I know you bonded over the horrific case of John Benet Ramsey. There's a lot of American cases in this book and just in the true crime world. I would say probably most of our big true crime cases come from, sadly, my country. You both are in the UK. When you dive into these cases, do you feel like you have a fresh, I guess I just want to know all your thoughts on it, but like here are some sub questions. Do you feel like you have a outsidery perspective that's really helpful? Do you feel like these cases are so famous that you also grew up steeped in them? Like, is Charles Manson yours too by now because he's so big? And yeah, just like, what are your thoughts when you look at America and see all these massively popular cases?
I think growing up in the UK, about 60% of our TV is American. So maybe even more, like 75%. So we're brought up with American culture constantly. It's not even like it's in the background and you just watch it. Like everyone, like, you know, everyone was watching the OC, like as it was happening. So it is, I don't know if we can claim Charles Manson as our own, but like, I think
you don't want to.
I mean, the American culture doesn't feel alien to us necessarily. I mean, I'm speaking for myself, but you have a bit of a different upbringing than me, but like,
it is, I guess, we're the closest culturally speaking, although we're, you know, here in Europe, like much closer to you guys culturally speaking than we are to mainland Europe, especially hashtag Brexit. But I think it's that fun tightrope that we can walk when we're examining American cases. We know just enough that it's not completely like we don't know anything, because it is, you guys, you know, you're the only superpower. That's why that culture has spread everywhere. We all feel like we're a part of that. But it's just that we don't know just enough that it makes it funny. And I think that's the appeal possibly for us, is that we often try to also explain a lot of British isms and British factors when they come up on the show. But my favorite thing is absolutely when we forget to do that, because we're both British. One of us isn't there prompting the other to be like, what do you mean by that? And my favorite thing is when we accidentally let slip through something. And my favorite will forever be the one in the Levi Belfield episode of the podcast where I'm talking about an ugly white people carrier being the car that was seen abducting Millie Dowler. We were like, and I just carried on. We breezed through. Hannah doesn't react. We breeze through. In this country, you call a minivan a people carrier because just lazy.
And it's
so lazy.
Because like all cars carry people,
but
right?
It's
like,
a people
what a
carrier.
ridiculous, like, yeah, it's a people carrier.
But that's why
an ugly white people carrier.
Yeah. And I just said it's because it was an ugly white people carrier. And people were like, the next day on Facebook, people were just like, what was she talking about? Is it a car for ugly white people? And I'm like, oh my God, guys, that's what
The importance of that
minivan.
comma.
I think you need.
I think even with the comma, they would have been lost. Honestly.
Yeah.
So there's been quite a few of those. And what we do say, because we, you know, the book is quite American case heavy, just because it's very like, you know, it's big hitters stuff. But like on the show, we do cases from all over the world, and we always say like we can't be from everywhere at once. So like if you want us to cover cases from everywhere, which is what we want to do and everyone enjoys it, you have to sort of forgive us some cultural nuance that we will miss. But I didn't know what a Cracker Barrel was. I just thought it was a derogatory place you kept white people, like in prison. Like,
You'd think.
so I literally had to like text my friend and be like, what is a Cracker Barrel? And she was like, well, they don't serve alcohol there, but they have a shop. So that was my understanding.
They're
It's a
kind of
septic tank.
magical in a horrible way. Yeah, but it does sound like a prison. You need to come to one. Come visit me and I'll
Do we?
We're
Do
coming.
we?
We're coming, Tori. Only for you.
Okay.
Okay, deal.
You don't need to, it doesn't need to become your go-to restaurant.
Got it. We're in. We're sold.
So when you picked these large cases to talk about, you talk about some really big ones, Jonestown, the toy box killer. Did you know ahead of time, were you like, okay, we definitely want to write about Jonestown, we want an excuse to do it? Or did it happen organically as you were putting your research together and I was like, okay, we need an illustration for this? And
Oh yeah, completely organically. There was, I think everything at Redhanded has been very undeliberate from the beginning. We're just like, this is what we're passionate about, this is what we enjoy doing, but we do not set out doing anything with any sort of plan, in all honesty. And with this book, the only thing we knew from the beginning was we're not the kind of show, and we're not the kind of storytellers who can do a deep dive into one case that could fill an entire book. That is the space for an investigative journalist to go and do, and that's not what we are. So what we always knew was what we wanted to do was to make it a culmination of everything that we had learned over the course of 4 years of doing the podcast. And one of the questions we get asked all the time is, what makes a killer kill? Like, what is that? And we knew that and people who ask that question often have an answer in their mind themselves about that. But what we have learned over the 4 years that we've been doing the show is that it is as far and wide reaching as your motivations for any of the behavior that you do. And it is usually because of something incredibly human. The factor will be something very human. And that's what we want to do. We wanted to pick 8 factors that we think influence all of us and shape all of our lives. So it's genetics, it's our childhood and our upbringing, it's sex, it's relationships, it's all of these things that make us all human, and how those things get perverted into shaping a killer or motivating a killer to do what they do. And so we really started with that framework. And then what we did is we dug up all of the research and we picked the hook or the narrative that we wanted that particular chapter to have. So with genetics, it was debunking some of these like pseudoscience ideas around the warrior gene, the idea of finding one gene that codes for a behavior as complex as violence or murder, and just pointing out how ludicrous this was. And so really it was reverse engineered from that. And then we picked the cases that fitted the narrative and the story that we wanted to tell.
mm-hmm.
I also really just want to do Jonestown though, so that one snuck in.
You went deep. I mean, it's so fascinating. I didn't realize that your chapters are, I guess, except for cults and maybe insanity, they're all things that apply to us too.
Yeah, even with insanity,
maybe, yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of meant to be more of a debunking again around. I know it turned into kind of talking about the not guilty by reason of insanity, but we really wanted to get to the heart of like, people can have mental health issues, like one of the killers in it. The other can be clinically insane like the other. But but what we wanted to make the point there was that, especially at the start, is that mental illness isn't a driver for killing. It's something everybody deals with. It was just, here's an example of how it's used, in debunking this narrative that somehow we should, be afraid of people with because that's again like a Hollywood portrayal, isn't it? Oh, they've got schizophrenia and they're not guilty by reason of insanity. And it's like, what do those things actually mean in real life? And that's what that chapter was.
And even with cults, no one joins a cult, full stop. Like, it happens to normal people. And I think that's the major point we're trying to make with the cults in Jonestown chapter, is that those people weren't weird going in. They got fucked up because of what happened to them. And if anyone was in the situation that they were in, if anyone was put through that, they probably would have made similar decisions.
Yeah. And actually the cults one, it was less about the cult leader.
Exactly.
It was more about because a cult leader, you can profile, like they're very similar. They're
Yeah.
narcissistic, they have psychopathic tendencies, they're megalomaniac, they're very similar types of profile and similar routes that led them there. The thing we were more interested in is these cultists who join a cult and go from being relatively quote unquote normal people to committing horrendous acts of abuse or murder because of brainwashing or because of mind control, and this one person who's leading them. And we wanted to point out there more about this, how that shapes a killer, that kind of coercive control or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Because Charles Manson is on every serial killer list you can find on the internet. Never killed anyone.
Well, it's of course very relevant to what Tori and I are facing in the United States at this moment. I mean, these kind of issues are,
On, you mean, and
yeah,
all that kind of stuff. Yeah. No, it's surprising and saddening how cults are not as far from us as we might like to believe.
No, it feels like quite an archaic
and of course,
idea.
cult members don't consider themselves members of cults,
Nope,
No.
not until it's too late.
Yeah. And I think you can argue, there's actually a great book out called Cultish by Amanda Montell. I don't know if you've seen the cover, the sweet 70s cover, but she writes about, we might be in cults, all four of us. You can be in the cult of Peloton or the cult of,
That is a fucking cult, isn't it?
yeah, right? We're all in these mildly culty things.
Yeah, invite this camera into your home at all times. What the fuck is that
People are
about?
so obsessed with the instructors.
Can't do it.
Why are they always wishing them
No
happy
from me.
birthday on Instagram and tagging them in things?
What's happening? I know no
No.
understanding of this
Mm-mm.
culture
Yeah.
whatsoever. Nope.
It's a bike culture that involves shelling out like $2,000 just for the
Yes.
bike. I did
Got
reach
it.
the point in the pandemic where I was like, I need one, but thankfully I didn't.
Good for you.
Didn't give in.
Resist.
It was like reeling back from a cliff. Like, what was I doing? How did I get there?
Well, good job you weren't on your static bike trying to roll back from that cliff, Tori. No, a nightmare.
Exactly. So let me use this as a therapy session for a moment.
Please do.
Let's talk about questions we get all the time that we dislike. And I'll start.
Yes, please.
I am so sick of getting the question, why do women love true crime so much?
You stole our question, Tori.
Tori, it's literally every day.
Is it every day? So, okay, what do you say? How do you cope?
I say, firstly, fuck you and your mom. No, I don't. I say, everyone is morbid. Everyone is into gruesome stuff. True crime is, look at war, for example, classically male pursuit. All of those things. What we always say is that true crime is the only space where women are allowed to look at morbid things without being told they're doing it wrong.
Yeah, and I think the of women enjoying true crime as well, because I think that for the longest time it was probably also quite a male pursuit. If you look back at like some of the older documentaries from back in the day, it's a very male dominated field. And I think that possibly there is some sort of correlation between the rise of true crime podcasts in particular and women dominating the space as consumers, because I think for the longest time there wasn't content being created that was looking at it from the perspective of women, possibly because it was being created by male producers.
Or that women wanted to consume.
Yeah. And I think that, again, happy accident, maybe podcasters like us are being female talking about these true crime cases from a woman's perspective, and it is appealing to women and it's bringing more women into the genre, possibly. I think it is just, I don't know what the answer is, because we can't talk about women as being monolithic is the answer that I would give, but possibly that's why.
Does it tend to be more dominated by women, the true crime podcast? I wasn't aware of that.
Not necessarily maybe hosting, but absolutely listening. Yeah.
Really? Huh.
Yeah.
Wow, it seems like that would be universal, because it really plays into all of our deepest fears.
That's what I would have thought, but so female heavy on the listenership side, which is interesting.
One of the things I guess to ask all three of you real quick is, I've always been interested in the shadow side, and it's something that is, of course, big in literature. You think of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde as the famous example of that. but, true crime, just kind of contemplating what are all four of us capable of doing if under the right amount of stress, the right circumstances, what's inside all of us, that's something that's fascinating and kind of scary to consider. And that's what you guys go into that quite a bit in the book, which I thought was great.
Thank you. I think that was one of the key things that we kind of always come back to on the show and in the book, which is this idea of people often find it the most comfortable to otherize killers and say that they're monsters. And particularly, again, coming back to the genetic side, what is this pursuit? What is this obsession with the pursuit for looking for a gene that codes for violent behavior? It's because we're desperately trying to say these people are born differently. They're not anything to do with us. And if we do that, really the motivation behind that, or the impact of that, is then that we can sweep away things like poor access to healthcare, poor education, poor housing, poor social issues that we have to face up to. If
nutrition.
We say, those things don't matter because those people were born that way and they were going to do it anyway. So we don't need to take any responsibility for our broken societies or whatever it may be that influenced or shaped those people. And that's really the key point that we always try to come back to in the book and on the show, is that they are our responsibility, and calling them monsters or otherwise is reductive.
Mm-hmm. It's so, the impetus to make them not our responsibility is so dumb when you look at how much it costs to keep someone in jail for life. It's like, okay, so you don't care about the criminal at all, fine, but like, it's expensive, like it's costing you. I just don't understand how it's become such a polarizing issue, when it's like, it should be like, we all want the same thing here. We all want a safer society. We all, but as with everything.
It's true though, and like this is actually something that didn't make it into the book, but it was originally in there. We all accept that like what we want is a lower crime rate within society, right? And like it has been proven time and time and time again that rehabilitative justice gives you that, but we don't like it because it doesn't feel emotionally equitable. Like we like an eye for an eye as a society, right? So we want people to be punished, but we know, especially when it comes to psychopaths, actually, as we do speak about in the book, that being fucking horrible makes it even worse. And it makes people reoffend, it makes people kill more people, but we're still not ready as a society to say, okay, maybe we need some reform in how people are kept and how people are treated in prison, even though we know, and we've seen it time and time again, that rehabilitative justice works.
Right.
We're not ready.
Well, in the 1970s, I think, I'm sorry to interrupt, Tori, but in the 70s here in this country, there was that big shift from, a largely rehabilitative approach to strictly punitive approach and this warehousing approach. And of course, it gave rise to the prison for profit disgrace that is, especially out here in the Southwest, don't get me started. But, we warehouse nonviolent offenders, many of whom, not to get on my little soapbox, but are suffering from a health problem of addiction and things like that.
Absolutely.
Anyway, I just thought
it's 100%.
Well, people on their third strike for fucking weed that's legal in however, like many other states. You know what I mean?
And it's also this idea of like, even if you pull it back from this huge idea of massive prison reform to restorative rather than rehabilitative, and we're going to focus on that takes huge amount of work. Even small things like the fact that all of the research shows that conjugal visits stop reoffending, reduce reoffending rates, because it allows that prisoner to remain connected to somebody on the outside. It allows them to maintain a stable relationship with somebody, and it massively reduces the risk of reoffending. Yet it costs nothing. It costs literally pennies to be able to have a conjugal visiting program within a prison to run that. But people are like, no, because I don't want that prisoner to be having a good time. They don't deserve it. We shouldn't be doing it. It doesn't matter, because it is a purely emotion-based, revenge-based decision-making, rather than what is the actual outcome that we desire, is that person not go back out and reoffend. And here's a free or very cheap option. No, I don't like it. And it's, we can't remove the emotion from these things. Of course, we're not naive enough to think that, but it is interesting.
Yeah, I think one of the things that contributes to that sense of like, I don't want this person this nameless person to have a wife or whatever, you know, I don't want them to have any happiness, is the fact that prisons are designed to keep incarcerated people away from the rest of us, and we literally can't see them. And so they become completely irrelevant to like us going about our day-to-day lives on the streets. And it becomes so much easier to think of them as less than human, you know, as almost like cattle locked up. And I don't know what the solution to that is. Like, I get that you can't have a prison made of glass or whatever, but I think like here in America, and it's probably this way around the world, our prisons are often in very remote places, and it's just, you literally don't know what's going on inside them. You don't see the people. You have all these cases of people being locked up for life, you know, from the age of 18 on, and they just become non-entities in society.
Absolutely.
And then, so how do you get your average Joe on the street to care if they have a conjugal visit or not?
And that's the thing, Tori, that's the role that I think true crime plays in society. And I'm not here to be like saying, you know, trying to be like, we've got some holier than thou task that we're like, for God's sake, we just like record podcasts in our bedrooms. Like we're not changing the world. But what I do think is when people like to say how grimy true crime is, or they look down on it as a genre, I'm like, if it does nothing else, if it does no other good in the world other than it makes people have a bit more empathy for victims and for killers and for those who are in prison for any kind of offense, and it draws attention to things like prison conditions or inequality or bigotry or misogyny or whatever it may be, then that's the beautiful thing about it, is that I think true crime, like few other genres, can give us can force us into putting ourselves in an empathetic in a position where we have empathy for people that we maybe wouldn't if we just watched it as a news piece.
Right.
And for the wrongfully convicted also, like one thing that you guys have us on justice system wise, if you're wrongfully convicted in the UK, it's impossible to get out.
Really?
Yes. Like there's many like very long and boring reasons why, but it is essentially impossible.
We don't have an appeal system.
We don't have
like
an
you
appeal
guys
system
do.
that functions properly. It exists, but it's not. It is not. So one of the big things we have here that you guys don't have in the States, lawyers here are not liable for cases that they do a bad job on. So you can't sue your lawyer if they do a bad job.
And also we don't have discovery. So you know, a defendant doesn't have access to the prosecution's case against them to build their defense. There's no such thing as discovery. They don't have that. So the police and the prosecution can collude and share information, leave out other suspects that, you know, could be reasonably used to undermine the prosecution's case, could be used to create reasonable doubt in the mind of the jury. All of that doesn't exist here. So there isn't a parallel investigation being conducted by the defense alongside the prosecution and the police's. It's only the prosecution and the police's, and the defense is blind. So you have no access to anything, which is shocking.
Yeah. So anyone getting a conviction overturned in this country is like a miracle. It just doesn't happen.
That's really scary. Really scary. Mm-hmm. Patrick, do we have some Facebook questions yet? Or people watching on Facebook, feel free to put them in the chat. I have more questions myself, but.
Yeah, I do too. Let's see. Mainly just people checking in. There is one that just came in, a comment. She says, I'm going to blow her pronunciation of her name. It's Roisin.
Roisin?
Yeah, as an Irish name.
It's Irish, yeah.
Yeah, I think that what Redhanded does well is show respect to the cost of life and the experiences of a case. Would there be any cases that you wouldn't cover for that reason, or is any case an option?
That's a good question.
I think any case is an option. I think that definitely the motivation wouldn't be that we didn't think we could do the victim justice. I think if we decided to shelve any case and not talk about it, it would purely be from the standpoint of, could our mental health withstand researching that case for 10 days, which is on average how long we sit with a case. I think one for both of us is probably the case of Junko Furuta in Japan. It's anybody who knows that case, and we've said it before on the show, like, please don't go and look up that case if you can avoid it, because I think it's awful. It's awful.
And I actually think from day one, like from 4.5 years ago when we started the show, like that was always the one that both of us were like, never.
I just don't really want to talk about that case. But again, at the same time, sometimes we feel conflicted.
Yeah, exactly. That's true.
We're like, why shouldn't Junko's case be told just because it's a harrowing
because we
story?
might feel a bit sad about it. Like, does that mean her story isn't worth being told? Like, we don't know. Like, we're all still on the fact we're working through it.
Yeah. So I think it would purely be for that reason.
Actually, I have a question for all three of you, which is about, with the whole rise recently in true crime podcasts and this renewed interest in, these, what do they call them? Citizen investigators or citizen sleuths or whatever. I don't know. I mean, can you talk about the relationship between law enforcement and citizen investigators? I can see on one hand that, the cops are like, Jesus Christ, go away. But on the other hand, I can also see, they're strapped for resources and time. And a lot of these citizen sleuths or whatever have nothing but time on their hands and can be extremely helpful in probably in missing person cases and digging into these things that the police just don't have the time and the resources to keep up with. Any thoughts?
The most classic example that we call them armchair detectives, is Don't Fuck with Cats, right? Like where that chat room of normal people found all of this, as you say, all of this extra information from looking through stuff frame by frame that the police hadn't found. I think if they're taking it to the police and the police are taking it seriously, I think that that's fine. What I can't fuck with is normal people deciding that they have it right and then going after someone just on their own. That I can't get behind, because what was it called, the Joe Berlinger one, the Elisa Lam one, that similar thing to the Don't Fuck with Cats forum decided that this one guy killed Elisa Lam. He was nothing to fucking do with it. He just happened to have stayed at that hotel once and they ruined his life.
Are you talking about the Cecil Hotel?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, the musician, the Mexican guy who
the poor death rocker guy. I was like,
exactly. Yeah. So I think, it's all very well taking on the mantle of investigative justice, but
you don't know what you're doing.
You don't know what you're doing. Tell the police. Don't ruin someone's life, man. He just wants to play death metal.
Because that's it becomes akin to vigilantism, which is something that we'll obviously never be on the side of. And I think it's also some people who, because we're very clear, we are not investigative, we are not anything to do with law enforcement, we are just storytellers. And I think that is a narrative we will repeat until the day we die. And I think sometimes some people get a bit carried away and they start to think that they are investigating. And what I would say to those people is, you are not investigating something, you are interpreting evidence and research and information that already exists. And that is all that we do. We just interpret what already exists and analyze it and add social commentary. You are not investigating it. That is not what's happening. And I think that people need to be realistic about that. And I think that, it's a dangerous game, but I'm not saying that they're never helpful, because of course they are. Tori, what do you think? I'm interested to know.
Yeah, I'm on the same page as both of you. I'm naturally very skeptical of it. You can point to examples where it worked. I think there are cases where, let's say you need someone to go through 1 million mugshots or 1 million Jane Doe listings, great. And there are some great websites that sort of organize people around that, great. Yeah. But it's just such a slippery slope. I also really dislike when podcasts decide to investigate and are completely unqualified. I won't say who I'm thinking about, but I mean,
we know, don't worry.
I just remember listening.
Even I know. Two of those.
I remember listening with horror as I was moving from Chicago to New York, driving a U-Haul, to this guy being like, there's something under the house. Before I called the police, I decided to dig myself. It's so you're ruining the crime scene, sir. It turned out to be nothing because, of course.
Yeah, ruining the crime scene for a podcast.
Yeah. So he's digging up what he thinks is going to be a corpse. And it's just how did we get here as a society? This is really
And
bad.
this is the thing, isn't it?
True.
We don't know what you're doing because law enforcement, number of times you come on law enforcement who don't know what they're doing and contaminate a crime scene. It's like we're talking about people getting a fair trial. You digging around in the crime scene is not setting the person up for success. Oh my God, that's horrible.
I know. So yeah, highly skeptical.
It's interesting. Have you in the United States? Before we got started, I was going to ask you guys about how true crime is perceived through different cultural lenses. Have you noticed? I mean, just British and American lens. I mean, I think about a couple of the high-profile British cases that that we've been made aware of. Of course, Jack the Ripper is probably the most famous. But then in the 70s and early 80s, you had the horrible Yorkshire Ripper case, which terrorized the nation. I think that's a fascinating case, by the way. But then here in this country, Tori, chime in. In the 70s, it was in the 70s and early 80s, it was kind of the era of the traveling serial killer, that terrified the nation. And you think about Ted Bundy, of course, as a prime example of that, and a little bit later of Ramirez. The technology has really changed the game. Like before, it was easy, for Ted Bundy just to simply slip across state lines, or go across the country. And there wasn't that coordination of resources between law enforcement. It was much easier to be anonymous. So, that's largely changed, for the good.
Oh yeah, I wonder if we'll ever really see like serial killers like that again, just because of how technology has changed. I also think culturally speaking, like you guys just have a lot more space for drifter killers.
Yes. Yep.
Not very far that a drifter killer could go here
We're only
without
Island after all.
It's just like cross the border and you're still here and we can still see you. So I think we don't have the geographical space.
He's down at the pub.
Like Guernsey or something.
For the drifter killer vibe. But definitely a very interesting time, in the 70s, particularly in the US, when you had like Son of Sam, you had all these different maps and you had so much going on. And I've even read theories about stuff like possibly there was such a peak in serial killerdom in America at that time. I'm sure you guys have seen this as well, about possibly having parents or fathers particularly who were in the Vietnam War and then coming back traumatized and traumatizing their children, and also just leaded petrol, hanging about in the air, making people more violent, which I think is interesting. Here we do couple killers, don't we? Fred and Rose West, Ian and Myra. I don't know.
Ian and Myra. Dennis Nilsen. We got
and for a country with a population that is a fraction. What do you guys like? 300 million. We're like 60 million. We're second in serial killers after the US. We are second.
I think per capita we probably are level pegging with you guys, to be honest.
Yeah.
I'm so proud of all of us.
I know. Go team.
Go us. I'm gonna obnoxiously speak for a third country. I once asked my Brazilian readers what true crime culture was like in Brazil, because my book came out there and I kept getting tagged on Instagram, and I was like, so are you guys into true crime? And a lot of people said that it's a very different vibe than here in the US and probably in the UK. Like there's more of a strong conservative culture of disapproving of it. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's definitely true crime fans, but I don't think it sounded like it wasn't quite as maybe you couldn't be as openly like, I'm a hashtag true crime podcast head as you can be in our countries.
Yeah, I don't think it's there everywhere, but hopefully it's coming.
Yeah. So yeah, it's very interesting to think about how this rabid fandom is probably not universal, even though I'm sure you have listeners from every country in the world. You probably.
I think we do sort of have. Maybe this is a bit more of a UK thing. I think maybe a cultural difference is like true crime is sort of in podcasting in the UK. It's sort of looked at as like a little bit of a redheaded stepchild. Like no, like it's not perhaps celebrated as a true crime category. but it's the most popular one. So
Yeah, I think that's the same here. It's just, it's slimy. Like I talked to this very successful true crime writer when I was just starting out, and he was like, your books are always going to be in the bookstore on the bottom shelf next to the bathroom. It's so true. It's so, that's where the true crime section is.
I mean,
Yeah, but
sure,
it's-
but you'll be selling way more than anyone else, so don't worry about
I
it.
know.
It seems like that the game has changed though, you know, whereas before it was, as you say, kind of tucked away, and the books tended to be, you know, mass market paperbacks, sensationalistic. There's been a real change. You know, there have been a lot of much more serious literary narrative nonfiction kind of approaches to true crime, which I think is really great, and sort of broadened what the genre is and can do. I love this bit at the back of the book. I wanted to bring it up quickly, which let's see. We've talked a lot in this book about what makes a killer tick, but what makes us tick when it comes to our fascination with killers, from serial killers to family annihilators, and the seemingly out of the blue murders featured on Snapped. We're hooked. This is what I like. Now, of course, a fascination with killers is something that exists on a spectrum. From reading this book and listening to Redhanded, the podcast, all the way up to buying yourself a John Wayne Gacy clown painting, or purchasing a strand of Richard Ramirez's hair. Yes, some people do take it that far. And also, you see these heavy metal musicians who buy like all this memorabilia. And also there's also the weird thing about, women who seek out and correspond with serial killers. And that's a whole
Bad
other
boys for
stuff.
life.
Yeah.
Or get married to them in prison.
Mhm.
You don't talk about that at all in this book, do you?
Yeah,
We do.
in the relationship chapter.
In the
hypersophilia,
relationships
yeah.
chapter, yeah.
Let's see. Okay, let me just look for some more questions here. Rebecca says, I just came here to say I so appreciate the nuanced approach of Redhanded. Your discussions around social issues are always so well considered, and it's clear there's a lot of critical reflection. As a Brit living in the US, and she says, don't worry, I don't have one of those weird Madonna-esque mid-Atlantic accents yet. It's also so great to hear discussions of current UK stuff from a progressive stance in real time through Under the Duvet, etc. I appreciate you both so much and can't wait to read the book. Very nice comment.
Oh, that's lovely.
That's
Thank you
very
so
nice.
much.
Thank you.
Let's see.
I'm practicing my mid-Atlantic actually, because we might be going on tour in America, we hope soon. So we think that maybe we'll have to translate our accents
Oh no,
a bit.
I'm
I'll
terrible
train
at
you, that's
accents.
fine.
Yeah. Well, actually, this is good. Rebecca says, P.S. Tori, I also read your book and greatly enjoyed it. This has been a great crossover. Yeah, I didn't want to, pay short shrift to Tori. Can you tell us a little bit about your book that came out earlier this year?
Michael? Yes, it's about real life con women from Marie Antoinette's court to the Civil War to today. Several of them are still in prison. And it's a raucous bunch, but if you think it's less dark, I thought it was going to be less dark than my serial killer book, but it actually gets there. Con artists are very, really sad stuff happens, and they very much victimize their victims in a way that we definitely don't see in our we all love con artists culture.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yes.
Yeah, it was definitely more fun to write and research, but the heavy stuff is, I would say, equally heavy. And some people do get murdered, which people say con artists don't murder, but sometimes they do.
Sometimes I do.
Do you have Hustle in America, the TV show Hustle?
I don't know.
What was that again?
Hustle? Yeah, no, we used to have it. It would have been when we were growing up. Anyway, if you can find it on BBC iPlayer or whatever.
Okay.
It's about like a con artist, like grifter gang.
Googling now.
Yeah. It's worth your time. It's worth a watch.
Yeah, it's called Hustle, Mickey Blue, Dreamboat.
Okay.
So when would this have been, in the 90s or the early 2000s?
I would say like early to mid 2000s. Hustle would have been in its prime.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Are the three of you film noir fans at all? Or so?
I don't think I could say that I know
No.
enough about it.
No.
No. It's fascinating though to look at, you know, some of like the femme fatale characters in classic film
Yes.
noir, you know, through the lens that Tori's talking about, you know, the grifters, hustlers, and some of those characters are really interesting.
I also think that's one of the, like, sorry to bring it back to our least favorite question of all time, but I actually think that's why one of the reasons possibly why women's interest in true crime has developed is because every single film that was about crime, it's always a woman that gets killed. So it was one of the only narratives in which the female was a central character.
That the women, you said the women got killed, or?
Yeah, always. In the film noir, you're joking. She's got a negligee, it's like falling off her shoulders. She's like, oh no, I'm dead. And then she's knocking on the detective's door. And she's like, you have to help me, you know? And that's the only character, I mean, maybe the only female character that even had lines.
There's some really good exceptions to that though. If you check out Double Indemnity with Barbara Stanwyck. And
I trust you. All right.
Yeah, no, check it out. I totally get what you're saying. But it's fun to look back at that culture and the time.
Definitely.
But not to digress too much. Let's see here. Yeah, just a lot of people checking in. Fellow, what else do we have here? Susan says, hello, spooky bitches from Arizona. Someone from Scotland tuning in. So.
Oh, up late.
Well, this is this has been great. Are there any other things we haven't really gotten into? Endlessly fascinating topic. Cannibals. What do we have to say about cannibals?
Very difficult to prove.
Yeah.
Unless you catch them in the act, almost impossible.
And we're obsessed. That's it. I think it's, you know, one of the last taboos that people will repeatedly be fascinated. No matter how many cannibal cases we do, people will eat that up. And yeah, they love it. Love a cannibal.
Sorry, it's really slow on the uptake. No. I'm sorry.
But we love a good cannibal, to put it horribly.
Can you describe Christ-themed EDM?
Oh, yes, we can.
Yes, that is quite something. Our publishers were actually like, you can't just say that he does that. And we're like, no, he actually does that. And they were like, oh, when we sent them the link to his music. For those of you who don't know what we're talking about, it's the Andrea Yates case. And it is, of course, Michael Warrenecki, the street preacher that she got involved with. Yeah. And he does do Jesus-themed electronic dance music. Because why not?
I wish I could beatbox so I could show you, but I can't.
Go onto his website, you can have a listen. He is a DJ.
Oh yeah, he's fully Googleable. You can go and find him and all of his Jesus dances.
And have yourself a little Jesus disco if that's what you'd like to do, because it's out
See,
there.
Folks, there's a little something for everybody here. We have black pills, blue balls, basement virgins, mommy issues, morbid nights, and murder prodigies.
Yeah, we're nothing if not copywriters.
Well, this has been such fun, guys. Thanks so much for spending the hour.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been such a pleasure.
Yeah. This is the book, and we will have our hardcover copies with the signed book plates. And we also have copies of Tori's book. And so I'm hoping this will be the start of doing some more true crime themed shows at the Poison Pen. We've done a few, but this has been such fun. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been a lovely way to spend a Tuesday evening.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Patrick. Thank you so much, Tori. It was an absolute pleasure. And to everyone watching, thank you. And yeah, buy the book.
Buy the book.
Buy the book. Yeah. And congratulations too, by the way.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. You guys have a great night. And Tori, a great day. And
absolutely.
Thanks, everybody.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Bye, guys.
Bye.